Hi, I'm Jen King, and we're talking today about ethical data collection and whether that such a thing is possible today in the existing business climate. So to start off, my first question is, how is it possible for you to run an ethically based data company in today's world?
Hey, Jen, and pleasure talking to you. So, first of all, it is completely possible to run a data collection operation or company in an ethical way. I'll start by that. The way to achieve that is, first of all, to understand that when you collect data, publicly available data online, you have to make sure that you won't damage the ecosystem. Just like a fisherman going out to the ocean to catch fish, if you'll fish too much too many fish in a short period of time, you won't be able to go back fishing in the next season. The internet is pretty much the same. While collecting that publicly available information from around the web, you have to be very careful not to damage the ecosystem. For example, not slowing down the website that is hosting the data and making sure you are aware to all of the regulation other aspects that you need to understand before you start the operation. This is what we're doing.
So I think one of the most important parts of the ecosystem that you're talking about is the role of trust. And I'm curious, how does trust matter to you in running your company? And where do you see that it's important in this larger ecosystem?
So basically, it's all about transparency. If everyone understands what you're doing and what they should be doing, then it's fairly easy. The way that we make sure that we gain trust, but we also trust our own customers that are using our system to collect data, is to make sure that we talk to everyone and each of them before they gain access to our platform. Our platform allowed them to see the web from the eyes of the real consumers. Think about driving a highway in the physical real world and seeing a billboard. And it's easy to compete this way. You can just pick up the phone to your team and tell them, I want a bigger billboard and in a better place, and also cut down the price by 10%. And you can compete with that company that advertise. Over the internet, it's almost impossible to compete this way. So we allow our customers to sit in that driver's seat and make sure that they see the content that an individual is seeing. We have a team of full-time compliance officers that make sure that our customers are, of course, their use case is legal, but also ethical, which means that it actually brings value to the world and creates that transparency that is lacking in the online world.
So what aspects are important to you from the, not necessarily your customers, but the public, the people whose data you may or may not be collecting? Obviously it'll depend on what your customers are looking for. How do you feel like their interests are best protected, or what attention do you pay to that question beyond the compliance efforts that you are ultimately going to be responsible for, based on jurisdictions, whether you're in the US or the EU?
Yeah, so actually, whether it's legal or illegal, it's an easy question to solve as a company and as a customer, as someone who wants to collect data, because you just need to understand the industry and the area and the physical location you're working on, and then it's black and white. You can understand if you can or cannot do it. The thing is that we're talking about ethics here, and when it comes to ethics, you need to understand if it brings value and if no one will get hurt by doing it. I have actually a few examples. I'll share one of them. A couple of years ago, we realized that it is legal, maybe it's still legal today, to create fake accounts on social networks, and by that also create fake engagement on social networks. It turns out that there's a huge market for these things, and you can buy followers and likes and things like that. Back then, even though that it was completely legal to do, we decided as a company not to support these use cases, as we couldn't understand what value the world would get to it. And I have my own personal test that I'm running before I need to understand if I want to approve something or not. And we get new use cases on a daily basis. Basically, the idea is to put aside the revenue factor. And if you think that it won't cost you anything, but you also won't earn anything from it, then it's pretty easy to understand if you want to support it or not from the ethical aspect.
So let's continue with that environmental metaphor for a second. So there's this idea potentially that, by not respecting the law or not acting ethically, essentially you poison a common resource. And so I'm curious, what are you concerned about in terms of that poisoning? Like, what are the harms you think that individual companies may cause to that entire ecosystem if they don't act ethically?
Well, publicly available data should be available for all. If everything will be transparent, it means that it's easy to compete, and competition is always a good thing for us, the consumers, those who eventually goes online to buy something or to see some content. If that company that wants to collect data want to do that not for these reasons, they just want to collect, for example, private data, even though that it's publicly available, to use it to affect someone's lives, that's probably not ethical, not an ethical use case. If they won't do it, for example, to be able to compete better, to drop the prices, to win another consumer, to buy on their site and not on the competitor's site, this is probably something that is ethical, because it creates, it brings back that transparency, which creates the competition.
So you operate in some different environments, obviously, if you compare the privacy laws or data protection laws that exist in Europe as compared to the US, where we have very few, and certainly almost nothing that restricts the collection of consumer data in the US. And so so imagine you are dealing with a customer in the US who, obviously has many fewer restrictions than one in the EU. And maybe they have an ask for you that you think, may cross ethical lines, let alone would potentially cross legal lines in the EU. How do you counsel them, or how do you talk about this with US customers, for example?
Sure. So when it comes to ethical, not legal, but to ethical, there aren't really borders. You can't really decide to be ethical in this continent and be less ethical in another continent for a few reasons. First of all, everything will be aligned eventually. The regulation in the US will be the same as in the EU, I believe, not in very long time. But again, this is more legal. When you have an ethical standard, it's not related to this country or that country. It should be a global ethical standard. So basically, if the EU today is more strict about these things, we should comply with the EU regulation also in the US, to my opinion, and this is how we try to act on.
So I won't ask you what are ethics, because obviously that can be a very broad and difficult question to answer. But I guess maybe more specifically though, what are you drawing on for your kind of ethical inspiration? Again, obviously the laws in Europe really can constrain what you can do. You need to have basically fit for purpose. You can't just go on a fishing expedition and collect whatever information you want, right? You actually justify what you're doing. But where really is your inspiration aside from the law in terms of thinking through like what is the right thing to do?
That's an interesting question, because we're in an industry that we're actually trying to create something new every day. Data is not a new industry. Data is the industry for a while now, but the data collection industry is fairly new. You have different types of ways to obtain data. You have data brokers, which is one thing. You have data collection products that you can utilize on your own, which is the second thing. This is more what we're doing. So it's an interesting question, because this is a fairly new industry. And there isn't actually enough regulation, in my opinion, in this industry. So these type of discussions are very important to be able to put it out there and have even the regulators to try and start to talk about these things. And this is what we're trying to do, also to educate the industry to talk about it in these events and talking in universities and things like that. So we are those trailblazers in this industry, I think, with other people like you and others. And I think that we just need to talk more and more about these things. I think that we're running out of time, so I want to thank Jen for this interesting conversation and for all of the viewers that are seeing this. Thank you very much for your time. It was very interesting for me.
Thank you.